You know, non-US investors love New York City. And they don't just love it a little, they love it a lot. So much so that every time we ask the question, what city do you want to invest the most in? They always answer New York City. Even in times of change, times of challenge, I think even in the times that we're experiencing right now, when there's so much uncertainty, New York City keeps rising to the top of the list. And I think part of the reason for that has something to do with this old idea that no one is an island. Even though Manhattan is an island, no property is an island. We are so reliant on the block, the community, and the city that surrounds that building. And the success of that city really leads directly to the success of any given property investment that we might have.
You are listening to the AFIRE podcast, real estate, technology, cross-border investing, and the opportunities of a changing world. Let's start a conversation now.
And so what I want to talk about today is how can we do a better job of partnering with the city. I'm lucky enough to have persuaded Melissa Román Burch, who's the COO of New York City's Economic Development Council, who's been doing a lot of interesting things around the development and the future of New York City. And she's an old property hand as well, used to work with Lend-Lease and Forest City. I'm really fascinated about what Melissa is doing and how perhaps we can learn to work even better together. So, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me on the AFIRE podcast.
Gunnar, thank you so very much. And thank you for that introduction. I look forward to diving in.
I'm surprised at how few people, I think, even in our industry, really know what NYCEDC is. And I'd love, well, let's just do the quick primer. What are you folks doing and how do you fit into the whole New York City equation?
It's a great question. And I couldn't agree more that we need a little EDC 101. So, the New York City Economic Development Corporation, also known as the EDC, is responsible for building a vibrant, inclusive, and globally competitive economy. That is our mission. We do this a number of ways. We strengthen business confidence in New York City as a leading city for private investment and a magnet for innovation industries and talent. Um, we are responsible for redeveloping underutilized city owned land into assets that improve neighborhoods, deliver sustainable infrastructure, generate new tax revenue, and create new jobs in growing sectors. So, structurally, we are a not for profit. We are a public benefit corporation. And interestingly enough, we are financially self sustaining. So we do not collect city tax revenues to fund our operations. We're not a government agency. So, how do we fund our 550 people at the EDC? Well, our engine is our sprawling real estate portfolio of over 64 million square feet and 230 assets across all 5 boroughs. You should think of us in many ways as New York City's largest impact real estate company. We develop and manage all of our assets, the 64 million square feet, to a double bottom line of financial returns and measured social impact. So ultimately, the NOI, the net operating income from our real estate portfolio, is how we fund our people, and then we reinvest all those dollars, since we are a not for profit, back into our economic development work. And that enables us to fund loan programs and fund workforce programs and fund incubators and other types of strategies for not just using our real estate to help grow the economy, but using our sort of industry development perspective to make sure that we are using our real estate to grow the jobs and the innovation sectors of tomorrow.
So an economic development council that's actually a real estate investor that is looking at all the various things that perhaps all of us should be looking at all the time, but don't always get there because we're not all impact investors. We're not necessarily looking at that triple bottom line as much as perhaps we'd like to. But it sounds like you guys are walking the talk and you are an investor that is supporting the success of New York City. Is that an accurate reflection?
Very much so. And I think what's interesting about the real estate portfolio is that it is, we are guiding policy and we are shaping policy, but we are shaping policy based on our practice. And so
Okay.
I think it actually makes us at the forefront. We're always at the tip of the spear of what the real estate community can expect or will experience. And we use the portfolio as a way of developing a thesis that, connects to policy that we have the ability to use our real estate to activate. We create all sorts of critical infrastructure, we adaptively reuse assets, and we create new assets. So I don't know if you've ever heard of New York City's cruise business, but we have 1.1 million annual passengers that flow through our Manhattan and Brooklyn cruise terminals. Those terminals and all of those agreements are managed and created by the EDC.
Okay.
The Brooklyn Army Terminal on the Sunset Park waterfront. This is a former Army base, was sort of last used in World War II, predominantly as a place to ship out supplies, but also, a place where men were shipped out to war. That closed and became fallow for many years. Well, we have completely reimagined and redeveloped that asset into a 4 million square foot waterfront campus that's home to over 100 advanced manufacturing businesses, and 4,000 people show up to work there every single day.
Hmm.
So that's an example of how we are, regenerating older assets and aligning them to where the growth sectors are for New York City. So if you look at an asset like that, and if we were only developing to a highest and best use, we might have thought, oh, well, this would be a great self-storage facility or perhaps a last mile distribution center. Well, one thing we know is that those types of uses, while they might deliver a large NOI because they're hard to come by in the city, don't generate jobs. So we've really been focused on developing our assets with a mindset towards how are we growing sustainable, high paying, high quality jobs for New Yorkers. And that's where we really leaned in that campus in particular, to green energy, renewable energy, and advanced manufacturing, which we all know are huge growth industries and are going to really propel New York City's economy forward.
And by definition, you're a long-term hold. So it seems to me that in some ways, since you're thinking about multiple dynamics, not just, hey, let's get a self-storage facility, get out, get a good return in a minimum amount of time, that you are able to perhaps create more revenue on a long-term basis as a long-term hold. I'm curious. You touched a little bit about how your relationship with the New York City government and with government in general as an investor that is working as an impact investor has an impact perhaps on policy. And I know that a lot of investors in the AFIRE universe are very concerned about the constraints, especially when it comes to redevelopment, repurposing of existing assets and the various barriers that are there. And we all can name them, off the top of our heads, and we all complain about them. But change is hard. But it seems to me that you're in a unique position of at least helping the government side understand what the real constraints are and what the real opportunities are. How are you working with the government of New York?
Sure. Well, we're working very, very closely with the mayor, and we are very tightly aligned with City Hall. So, to give you an example to bring that to life, we have, through our ground lease portfolio, we own several city blocks under Times Square. So, that's part of our 64 million square feet. So, we're very much noticing and thinking about and experiencing some of the dislocation that's happened in our central business districts. And in fact,
Hmm.
when Mayor Adams first came into office in 2022, and the leadership, that's when I joined the leadership of the EDC, there was a group of 59 civic, business, real estate, and academic leaders that were gathered together by the mayor and the governor, called the New New York Panel. And that group was focused on delivering a report and a series of recommendations that were focused on how we ensure that our business districts remain globally competitive and vibrant. And what do we need to do? I mean, especially winding back the clock back to 2022, we were all coming out of COVID. There was a lot of distress in the business districts, and we knew we wanted to come out very early and very solidly in private partnership to figure out how we not only protected and helped to regenerate this area, but how do we also facilitate growth? Because
Right.
the one thing we know is that New York will remain a global center for work. And we are quite confident, because it is the history of New York, that we will also be an innovation engine. But we can't just rest on our laurels. And so
No.
what we did is we convened this group of 59 civic leaders. There was a report that was put together that had 40 recommendations, and that really was a roadmap for Mayor Adams and for Governor Hochul, who worked side by side, to endorse that report. That report was also led by two former deputy mayors, Richard Bury and Dan Doctoroff, who came out of retirement from having served us very ably as deputy mayors in previous administrations, but to work collaboratively with this administration. And when I think about that report and about the 40 recommendations, that has really been the roadmap over the last 2 years. And I think that we've seen some incredible results stemming from getting that type of clarity around the public-private partnership and clarity around what needed to happen in the private sector camp as well as in the public sector camp. So let's drill down on that for a minute, because to me, there's really three major elements that I think have been responsible for what I see as a pretty dramatic and exciting turnaround that's still happening and that's still underway, but that is very much what you see when you come to Midtown Manhattan. The first of those is we need to adaptively reuse our buildings. So we know that
Right.
we have a number of aging office buildings. The average age of an office building in Manhattan is 80 years old. So that is an old office building. We need to make sure that we are regenerating those buildings and investing in them. So there's about 450 million square feet of office space in Manhattan, and about 100 million of it is sitting vacant right now. And some of that vacancy is really due to obsolescence. And what we needed to do was to create a regulatory pathway for those office buildings to convert from an office use to a residential use. Now, there's some parts of the city where that can happen already as of right, but there were other parts where regulatory reform was needed to enable a much more significant grouping of buildings to be able to make that transition.
Hmm.
So that's obviously not for every office building. I'm not
Right.
suggesting that all 100 million square feet should convert. What I am suggesting, though, is that the government was very attuned to the fact that it needs to help develop more options for office owners so that they have a whole suite of considerations to think about, for addressing vacancy in their building. They
Right.
can renovate it. We have an MCOR program that's focused on modernizing aging office buildings and helping them transform into high quality, high caliber office buildings. We've now been successful in delivering legislative change at the state level and now have the ability for buildings that were built prior to 1991 to all be considered for conversion candidates to residential.
Hmm.
And we've also just recently introduced a new tax incentive called 467M that would allow buildings that are converting from office to residential. If they deliver 25% of those residential units as affordable housing, they can qualify for tax abatements to help lower the cost of investment and help pay for that affordable housing. So I think we have incredible momentum now into these business districts. And of course, yes, there are headwinds, and we should talk about that. But I know what we do have is sort of a clearing of the path of some of the regulatory barriers that were preventing action. So we can, now say that we have sort of the right combination of regulatory reform to help meet this moment in the market.
A lot of the work you do is around innovation, innovation investments, innovation districts. But one of the things I find fascinating about innovation and change is that whenever you're changing something, it means that what you had before has to go through some form of death. It ends. And William Shakespeare famously wrote that death is an undiscovered country. I believe that innovation is an undiscovered country, which means there's a certain level of exploration, a certain level of blind alleys and mistakes that are made. How do you think about investing in the innovation future of New York, knowing that you don't have all the answers yet, that you're still in terra incognito?
Sure. Well, I like to think what you describe also as creative destruction, and that is a business concept. Clay Christensen and Michael Porter and others have studied that, and I think that is an important part of an economy. New York has an incredibly resilient and diverse economy. And to answer that question, I think I just want to look back historically for a minute because 20 years ago, New York City was really very clearly understood and known as the global center of finance. We
Right.
were a Wall Street town. And our budget reflected that. When the boom times came to Wall Street, we had very strong tax collection, and in um, down years and bear markets, we saw it in the tax collection. And there was a very concerted effort from the city leadership that has been sustained over many, many years and many, many administrations to diversify the economy. And what's so interesting is that when you look at New York City's economy today, we have more tech jobs in New York City than we do finance jobs in New York City.
Hold on. I think you need to say that again. Let's make sure everyone hears that because I don't think that's that's universally understood.
Yes, so we have more tech jobs in New York City. Now, this refers to the total number of jobs at tech firms, in addition to the number of tech-related jobs at non-tech firms. So, like a software engineer at a bank would
Right.
be part of those tech jobs. But when you think about technology and tech jobs, and the vast majority of these are within tech firms and startups, and New York City has this incredibly vibrant tech ecosystem. It is incredible that there are more tech jobs today than there are finance, and I think actually finance and insurance jobs. So there's about 369,000 tech jobs and 350,000 finance and insurance jobs. So that's just one example of how New York has decided to diversify, and in making those investments has actually yielded something greater than what it was previously known for. Now, this isn't to say that New York City plays favorites in that way, because I will make a very clear point, which is that New York City's strength is that it is not a monoculture. It isn't a mono industry. So we have, this incredible diversity, and it's not only finance and tech. We have entertainment, we have film, we have media, we have consumer products, we have healthcare, arts and culture, real estate. These are all very vibrant parts of our economy that enable us to sort of smooth out the ups and downs. And one thing you may not also know, Gunnar, which I'm happy to share with you, is that New York City, in terms of its economic recovery, and I think a lot has been studied about how have cities recovered post COVID. Well, New York City has the most number of jobs ever in the history of New York. So right now we have 4.1 million private sector jobs. When you look at total jobs, private and public sector, that's at 4.7 million. That's the most on record ever. And it's also higher than 2019. So when I look at pre and post COVID, we not only have recovered the 950,000 jobs that were lost during COVID. You will recall that New York was really the early epicenter of the pandemic within America. 950,000 jobs were lost. We are now just shy of 1 million jobs having been recovered. So not only have we recovered everything that we lost, but we are firmly into growth territory. And I think that's exciting and really speaks to New York City's resilience. It speaks to the investments that we're making within the Adams administration and within this EDC to make sure that we are leaning into the future and are staying future focused.
That's an amazing story, and but at the same time, growth does not come without challenges, and it suggests to me that if you've added 1 million jobs since 2019, it was already difficult to find a place to live during that time. How do you see the residential environment evolving in New York over the next 5 years to just somehow have a place for all those new jobs to live. I mean, is that going to be a limitation on continued growth in that there isn't a lot of new housing units, or are there more housing units coming?
Well, housing is a critical issue for economic growth and economic development. And, I think there are those that say, oh, the EDC, you're focused on growing jobs and growing the economy. We actually know that without the talent to be able to live affordably in a city, that will impair economic growth. So these two issues are extremely connected and related, and we spend a lot of time focused on housing. So let's just talk about housing for one moment, because um, for more than 40 years, job growth has outpaced housing growth. So we do have a housing crisis right now in New York City. We are undersupplied for housing. So we have not built enough housing. This is not since COVID. This is not a 5-year
Mhm.
problem. This is really a multi-decade problem that has accumulated undersupply of housing, has now reached an inflection point. We have the lowest vacancy rate in the history of New York City, 1.4% vacancy rate. And you'll recall that New York City is a renter's town. So close to 70% of the people in New York City are renters. So those vacancy rates are really critical, a way of understanding the ability for people to secure housing in New York. So we know we need to build more housing. We also know that we need more affordable housing. And Mayor Adams has set out a very ambitious goal to develop 500 housing units in the next 10 years. This is New York City's housing moonshot. So this goal acknowledges that not only are we undersupplied, so I think there's about 350,000 of those housing units are really to address historic undersupply, and
Mhm.
then about 150,000 is addressing the need for growth and to make sure that we are planning for growth, and we're absolutely planning for growth as a city, and we're already seeing that we need to keep up in that regard as we look at the relationship between jobs and housing. So, just taking a finer lens, and again, I said that this is a multi-decade problem in the making, but if we just isolate the most recent decade from 2010 to 2020, 900,000 new jobs were created in that decade. It was one of the most unprecedented decades for job growth in New York City. In that corresponding time, only 200,000 housing units were created. So it's not to say there should be a one-to-one ratio, that that's not what the ratio is, but I think it really highlights just how dramatic the undersupply has been. New York City, historically, when you look at the last 15 years or so, has generally, on average, created about 25,000 new housing units a year. So, in order for us to meet that housing moonshot and deliver 500,000 units over the next 10 years, we need to double the level of housing supply that we have been seeing in New York over the last stretch. So this is a very serious undertaking, and what it means is that we are, to quote our deputy mayor, Maria Torres Springer, we are looking at everything everywhere all at once. This is not a one stop, or a one size fits all solution. So we are looking at office to residential conversion because we know that it is going to enable us to deliver housing units in some of the hardest to develop areas, which are in the central business district and right at the core and some of the most expensive real estate in all of New York City. This is an opportunity for us to deliver housing, and we think 20 to 30 million square feet of that 100 million vacant square footage will convert to housing.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
20 to 30 thousand housing units right in the core, but that's not it, and that's not enough. And so the City of New York, the Department of City Planning, has been working on what's known as City of Yes for housing opportunity. This is an update to the city's zoning code. Our zoning code was first put into place back in 1961, and this would be a comprehensive update to to the zoning text that would enable all sorts of regulatory reforms to happen. Things like basement apartments, things like adding just small levels of density to more places all over New York City. So instead of just looking at high density zones to be able to deliver the housing, this would be an opportunity for lower scale communities to add just, 1 or 2 stories. Well, when you do that, compounded over the entirety of the city, you really start to generate housing everywhere.
Mhm.
This would also look at additional housing density bonuses near mass transit, because transit-oriented development is a smart way for delivering that growth. And New York has a tremendous public mass transit system with our subway system, and we can, you know, obviously bring about incredible housing creation if we're able to add additional density there. So this is a very complex and very detailed zoning proposal that is making its way through the entire land use review process of New York City, which starts with getting certified into ULURP, as it is known. So the Housing of Yes, or City of Yes for Housing Opportunity has been certified, and we can expect to have a final vote on that proposal by the New York City Council in about 7 months' time. Another way in which we're really leaning into this is using um, public land for the creation of housing.
Okay.
And I will just highlight that we've been very focused on activating sites. For example, the Willets Point site, which is right next to the Citi Field Stadium in Willets Point, Queens.
Mhm.
This was a site that has been 60 acres, a lot of chop shops and auto dealers, and has a huge history of environmental degradation. Many mayors have long desired to regenerate this piece of land and have actually taken steps to enable this to happen. The Adams administration and the EDC has really been at the forefront of delivering an exciting proposal that's actually no longer just a proposal, because now it is a fully entitled development site and an active development site that's going to deliver 2,500 units of 100% affordable housing and a 25,000 seat stadium for soccer. This will be New York City's first soccer specific stadium. If you can imagine, there is no soccer venue in all of New York City.
Mhm.
When the New York City Football Club wants to play soccer, it is playing soccer on a baseball diamond at either the Mets or the Yankees.
Yeah.
So, and I think also importantly is about cutting smart economic development deals. This soccer stadium will be 100% privately financed. It will be the first privately financed sports facility in all of New York City. So that project, in order to deliver something that transformative, the 2,500 units of housing, there'll be a new school that's created, new parks and open space. The city is also investing a lot into infrastructure to support that kind of development. So the city is investing hundreds of millions of dollars into new sewers, water mains, streets, to enable this type of private investment to come into not just creating housing, but creating a neighborhood,
Yeah.
creating a really exciting and vital place, creating a home for soccer, but also creating a home for workers seeking affordable housing and a vibrant community.
That is exciting. I mean, I seem to remember 20 years ago people talking about that site. To see some movement forward is exciting, and nothing like a crisis to get things going. I'm excited to hear you say that. Now, a big issue, certainly for institutional investors, especially those out of Europe and Canada, and to some extent in the United States, is around sustainability and around the global crisis we have around carbon and energy production and use and pollution. And it seems to me that New York has been taking some leadership roles here. I'd love for you to talk about what you're doing and your organization is doing to support sustainable development in New York.
sustainability is critical to the future of cities, and New York City has set a goal of 100% clean energy by 2040 and net zero by 2050. And in order to get there, it's going to require a number of policy interventions. But I want to highlight, in particular, Local Law 97, which is a really globally leading policy around the decarbonization of buildings. So New York has 1.1 million buildings across the city. Local Law 97 applies to those structures that are 25,000 square feet or greater. So there's about 50,000 of those, and those structures represent a very significant amount of the built square footage and of the carbon that's being emitted. So this is the right group for us to focus on
Yeah.
for this sort of first set of environmental policies. So Local Law 97 has three different time periods by when buildings need to take decarbonization efforts to reduce carbon emissions. The first one of those is in 2024, then 2030, then 2034. Interestingly enough, and I think one of the reasons why it's so important for governments to put out ambitious policy targets and then to hold up those targets in terms of enforcement is that if you roll back 2 years ago, about 20% of buildings were out of compliance with what they needed to accomplish for Local Law 97 for 2024. Fast forward those 2 years, and now only 10% of buildings are out of compliance to meet those laws. So if you end the year out of compliance, fines will be assessed. So many different governments have been weighing, is it the carrot? Is it the stick? New York has taken a stick approach with Local Law 97, which is if you don't comply, fines will be assessed. Now, some landlords have just said, we're going to pay the fines. That's obviously not the reaction that we're looking for. And I think that just by the statistics of the 20% out of compliance coming down to 10% out of compliance, and we still have time to go in 2024, is really showing that the policy target is moving the needle and that the government is getting the response that they want, which is compliance. We want to see the carbon reduced. So that's super exciting and one major policy goal. The other that I'd like to mention here is our Green Economy Action Plan. So in February of 2024, the EDC announced with Mayor Adams the creation of the Green Economy Action Plan, which is really the first of its kind. This is not a report that is looking at sea level rise or some of the we have a report called Plan NYC, which really evaluated some of those climate related risks, and those are really important to understand. But this report is around what is the economic opportunity that exists as we migrate our economy to a green future. So this is a vision for fighting climate change while also creating economic transformation for New Yorkers. And the plan articulates the city's vision for a green economy, which was really the first ever definition for the green economy. And it identifies the sectors and the subsectors where we're going to see a lot of that growth. So right now we have about 133,000 jobs that are part of our green economy. And by 2040, we expect that number to grow to 400,000 green collar jobs. So that's going to be a huge transformation of our economy. So it's going to create jobs. It's also going to be a huge economic and GDP generator. So these types of sectors and subsectors that are related to the green economy include things like transportation, waste, energy, the building sector, but then also areas like finance and consulting and consumer products. So this is a definition and an economic transformation that goes across a lot of traditional sectors. And I think, interestingly enough, of the 400,000 jobs that we expect to see in New York, green collar jobs by 2040, 70% of those jobs are going to be in occupations such as construction or fashion designers or financial consultants who are incorporating sustainable practices into their everyday work, while about 30% of those jobs are going to be entirely new jobs. As an example, in particular, the energy sector is pretty unique in that most of the jobs that are going to be in that sector will be net new.
Yeah.
So, one thing I'd love to talk about connected to that is offshore wind, because I
Right.
think that's a very keen example of what we will expect to see by way of brand new sectors and brand new job portfolios that don't exist today, that through this green economy transformation will be robust parts of our economy in 2040.
Well, as you talk about offshore wind, I'm actually very curious as you're looking at 2040, 2050, you're looking at, in order for your goals to be met, energy can't be coming from traditional, or historical means of energy. So what is the energy mix for New York City ideally over the next 20 years?
The energy mix will obviously be about migrating to renewable. So
Right.
ultimately, all of the buildings within New York City need to become electrified.
Okay.
And that's what Local Law 97 is eventually building towards, is that all of the buildings that are covered by that law, again, the 50,000 buildings will need to be electrified. That will enable the electric grid to be supplied with renewable energy sources. That will include wind, that will include solar, that will include other types of renewables, hydro. There's a whole sort of mix. Battery storage has really been a very active part of what we're seeing come into the market right now as we look at that green energy transition. We have an industrial development authority, which is a tax abatement granting authority housed within the EDC that has been helping to finance battery storage projects, because that is a critical part of building up the transmission and grid capabilities that are needed to serve, again, an economy that's growing and that's going to consume and need more energy. So this is a multi-pronged approach. I should also mention our partners at the state level, NYCERDA. This is a state organization that has been entering into the power purchase agreements with the offshore wind developers, and it's been a critical partner and really leading the way for New York State to meet its very ambitious 9 gigawatt wind energy goal.
It's not just that we need to replace the energy we're using right now, but if you are a tech hub, your energy use is only going to go in one direction, and that's not down. Big part of our investment base, these investors are investing in data centers all over the country, all over the world, and they're having more and more trouble getting the electricity required for those data centers, not to mention even for regular property types like multifamily, just getting plugged into the grid. Is New York City and New York State making the appropriate level of forward-looking investments for the grid to bring it up to speed, not just the source? And what are the challenges that we're probably going to face over the next couple of years?
Sure, I'll give you one very concrete example of that. The EDC was proud to break ground on a pretty dramatic transformation of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which is a waterfront site located in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, not too far from our Brooklyn Army Terminal project. We are transforming that piece of land, 70 plus acres, into the largest offshore wind port in the United States. We are doing that in a public-private partnership with Equinor, who is one of the world's largest offshore wind developers. New York City is helping to seed this investment with $100 million that's being matched by $1 billion investment that Equinor is making into transforming this municipally owned piece of land into a port that can service over 130 wind turbines out in New York Harbor. And those are just the ones that Equinor controls. This port would be open to third parties as well that are seeking an area for assembly and construction, for staging the turbines, for servicing them over the life, of those agreements. And then also part of the site is an interconnection point. So it's building a substation so that, the energy will come via cables from the offshore wind turbines and will come into the substation, into our interconnection point here that Equinor is developing, and then ultimately connect into the grid. So investments, to your point, need to be made at all different stages, not only generation, but also at capacity and other other parts of the grid infrastructure. And so, the interconnection point is a part of that, and we're seeing a number of those, come into this market. And I think that, these are uses that need to be cited. These are not in and of themselves the highest creating job generating uses in terms of jobs contained within those interconnection facilities, but what they serve by way of the broader economy and the job growth and creation that comes from, being able to service AI firms and other tech firms and other advanced manufacturing firms that need to draw on that energy and have a reliable source of energy is really critical. And so very much a part of our economic development mandate.
When you think about New York City, and what is it that people get wrong about it? What is it that they miss that you think they should know, other than the fact that it's not just the Wall Street anymore? What other areas do you think people need to pay attention to in New York that they may not know?
Well, I love that question. And hopefully you've heard a few tidbits in terms of job composition, in terms of, just how strong the economic recovery is in terms of being at peak jobs in the history ever. But I think the thing that people miss that are newer to the city is that New York City really is a city of five boroughs. There's Manhattan, there's Brooklyn, there's Queens, there's the Bronx, there's Staten Island. I mention that because our corporation, the EDC, is really about delivering a five borough economic development strategy. And when I think about a singular concept that really connects all those five boroughs, I think about New York City's harbor. And our harbor is an enormous coastline. It's 520 miles of coastline. So many people think about New York City and they think about our skyline. And that's sort of the classic Manhattan, and it's breathtaking and it's phenomenal. Um, but we have this incredible coastline, and starting to think differently about connectivity between different economic centers, it is about how we start to harness the potential of our waterways. We are already doing that through our New York City ferry system, which is about passenger movement. So we started that in 2017 from scratch. The EDC runs New York City Ferry. So this is a huge mass transit expansion that was undertaken by the EDC and operated by the EDC today. We have record number of passengers, so we are growing, even while other forms of mass transit are, significantly off in terms of ridership. We are growing. We now have 7 million passengers, 25 plus landings across all five boroughs. So this is really about another way of thinking about connectivity and moving people around the city. So not just relying on subways, we also can use our waterways. The next frontier is really how we think about the movement of freight and goods on those waterways as well to relieve congestion. And I think it's really going to unlock a whole series of opportunities on our waterfront. And that's why that waterfront and sort of understanding the power of this harbor is something that Mayor Adams really called for and announced in his initiative called the Harbor of the Future, which he announced earlier this year, and is really one of the cornerstone visions and ambitions for the EDC as we look towards economic transformation. So we talked about moving people, moving goods, moving freight. We recently took over a 120-acre site in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, that has, for the last many, many decades, been controlled by the Port Authority. It's a container terminal that really doesn't operate as a container terminal anymore. It only sees 1.4% of all of the containers that come into New York Harbor go there. So this piece of land can be generated for a modern maritime facility that will, perhaps help us think differently about how goods and freight connect in with last mile and middle mile. But also, this site can be thought of in terms of new uses, potentially housing, potentially other neighborhood serving amenities like open space, schools, parks, etc. So I want you to think about New York City not only in terms of skyline, but in terms of coastline. And as you think about that coastline, it is not only about housing and parks, which are critically important and have been very much a part of the policy driver over the last 20 years. But I want you to also think about the economic transformation that can happen as we really bring jobs in close proximity to a lot of that new housing density and think very differently about how to activate our coast.
Fascinating. New York is so much bigger and so much greater than anyone realizes. I'm amazed that you're able to keep it all in one head, in one organization with the broad portfolio of things that you're working on. This is exciting. And I look forward to more conversations with Melissa Román Burch, who's the COO of New York City's Economic Development Council. We've run out of time here, but thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time with us here today. Thank you, Melissa.
Gunnar, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
You've been listening to the AFIRE podcast. Remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast subscription service, such as Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitchers, and others. AFIRE is not engaged in providing tax, accounting, or legal advice. No content in this podcast is to be construed as a recommendation to buy or sell an asset. Some information included has been obtained from third-party sources considered to be reliable, though AFIRE is not responsible for guaranteeing the accuracy of third-party information. The opinions expressed are those of its respective contributors and sources, and do not necessarily reflect those of AFIRE.